people like my parents, they counteract that, I think, in a really important way as we're trying to detox from celebrity culture in the church.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar on celebrity culture with Katelyn Beaty. Today's title of this webinar on celebrity culture is Wholesome Ambition, Becoming a Transformative Speaker Without Succumbing to Celebrity Culture. It's a mouthful, but it's something that stems from the question that our clients have asked. I should say, my name is Daniel Gilman. I'm the director of the Center for Public Speaking, and I'm just one of 12 coaches here who work around the world with women and men, professors, pastors, politicians, aspiring authors, a whole gamut of people who want to use their voice to make a beautiful difference in this world. And so I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so excited for this webinar. We're going to be giving out Katelyn's newest book. It just came out last week, and I was looking for more copies of it. So I phoned Chapters. It's the biggest book retailer in Canada. And I called them because I couldn't find any hard copies where I live. And they said, we're all sold out. And this is within less than a week of the book actually hitting the press. So we are so, I've got to read the book in a digital format and absolutely loved it. I texted Katelyn at one point saying, I am reading this so scared. And I really was so raw and vulnerable to be in that place of speaking and writing and reading this book. So much in it is revealing and convicting. Today's speaker, Katelyn Beaty, was educated at Calvin College and also studied theology at Oxford University. She was the youngest and first female managing editor at Christianity Today. She's now the editing director, I believe, at Bezos Press, and she gets to work with a whole myriad of authors and aspiring authors in her work. And she has written the book A Woman's Place, another book that was profoundly insightful and formative for me, which I highly commend to you. And again, she just published last week the book, Celebrities for Jesus. So please give a warm digital welcome, coming to us from New York City, Katelyn Beaty. Katelyn, welcome.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Daniel, and thanks to everybody who's joined us today. I'm seeing the locations being shared in the chat, and it's exciting to see that we have so many Canadians among us. I'm not used to that, but it seems like you might be a warmer crowd than some of the American audiences I've spoken to. So thanks for taking the time to join us today for this conversation.
Katelyn, something I loved from your bio, in the opening paragraph from your website, it says something to the effect of, I love using words and believe they can change the world. And that's something that resonates with all of us tuning in today in the realm of speaking and writing. We love words. I'd love for you to share more with us about your own journey of coming to love words and believing they can actually make a difference.
Well, going back very young, I think my parents, Tim and Karen, would tell you that I was a very verbal child. So utility of words did not came easily to me. Of course, I was a kind of voracious reader growing up, and all through school, both in high school and college, realized that I actually enjoyed writing papers. I think what I was learning is that writing is a way of thinking, processing ideas, both for yourself and then eventually for others. In college, I also worked on the student newspaper and was able to write some essays and kind of op-eds, and realized that in doing so, I was helping my fellow students and people on campus to kind of make sense of things going on campus from a Christian perspective. I really enjoyed bringing together kind of faith and culture and helping others think through issues both on campus and then later kind of nationally and globally. My first job was at Christianity Today, as Daniel mentioned. And for those who don't know Christianity Today, it's considered the flagship evangelical publication founded by Billy Graham in the 50s and located in the Chicago suburbs. And again, that was a place where our staff was responsible for writing and publishing in a way that would help our readers connect faith and culture, apply their faith to pressing issues of the day. And I really found in that place that writing could be not just a way to process my own thoughts, but really ultimately a way of serving other people and shaping hearts and minds. So I can't see myself not writing no matter what I'm doing.
Amazing. Well, the book that you just published, the full title is Celebrities for Jesus, How Personas, Platforms, and Profits Are Hurting the Church. Can you define for us here at the very start, what is a celebrity and what is celebrity culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's important as we're thinking about celebrity dynamics in the church and beyond. What are we talking about? Celebrity can be kind of a slippery thing to define, especially when you think about fame. But I really come down to celebrity being a kind of social power without proximity, often kind of using the tools of mass media over the last 100, 150 years to project an image and a persona that draws a fan base, where the adoration is less about the work or a particular accomplishment or creative work. It's really more about the person and an attachment to the person. And then, social power without proximity, I think for those of us who are part of a Christian community, when we have a lot of power in whatever means that comes from, we need to be surrounded closely with people who know us kind of behind closed doors, off the stage, off the screen, who can speak the truth and love into our lives, and relationships where we can really stay grounded and humble, and receive accountability. And so it's often, celebrity is dangerous because it often comes without proximity. It has a distancing and isolating effect. And when we are distant from others and isolated from others, all of us are susceptible to a temptation to misuse our power.
In the book, you differentiate between celebrity and fame. And can you do that for us again now?
Yeah, so celebrity is a distinctly modern phenomenon. I mentioned the use of mass media. We've only had the tools of mass media kind of starting with, I would say, in an American context, the newspapers, and later on, radio, television. Of course, all of us have the tools of social media at our disposal today. But in every time and place, fame has been something that is attached to certain people, often because of their family lineage or military prowess, oftentimes just because of accomplishments. In the Christian world, it might be because of living a particularly virtuous life or a life of sacrifice or service. So in that way, sometimes fame comes to people because of their good works, because of their excellent work, because of their accomplishments. And I tend to think that's okay. Fame is sometimes attaches to people when they're not looking for it. And I tend to think that is healthier than a kind of notoriety that is specifically sought out for its own sake. If any of us find ourselves with a measure of fame, then it's our responsibility to figure out how to steward that well, how to steward that faithfully. But, fame is best when it's kind of a byproduct of good works rather than the thing that's being sought in and of itself.
I appreciate that. Now, we're part of the idea of asking you to come and do this webinar with us is that we're working with aspiring speakers, sometimes veteran speakers, but almost everyone that we work with and tuning in today are people who have a message burning in their heart. I know a number of us are really passionate about making the church a safer place from predatory men. And so that message is burning in someone's heart. They want the church across Canada or the world to become more safe. And they love words. And so they want to write books that will get published, be read by people. They want to speak on stages or even get on network TV and share their beautiful, wholesome message. But how do we balance that and understand that like drive to share a message with the world with not perpetuating and buying into celebrity culture?
Well, that's a really good question. And I don't think I've had an interview about this book where that tension hasn't come up, because I think a lot of us as communicators feel that we have a message to share. Maybe we have a sense of calling or vocation, recognize that to communicate with people in our modern age, we need to use the tools of media, whether that's being amplified on a stage or over a podcast or a webinar like today, or writing a book and publishing it. So there's a sense in which we feel like we need to use these tools. I think so. The question is not getting away from tools or saying all mass media is bad. It's how do we use these tools wisely? You just mentioned, Daniel, the possibility that people joining us today really want to speak on behalf of those who do not have a voice. That is a biblical command, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves in issues of justice. I think that, if you are entering the space of platforms with that desire, really thinking about the people you are trying to speak for as being the ones you are serving, it really as first and foremost. Keeping in your mind, okay, my central motive, my central call is to serve people who do not have a voice. And so how can I do that? Making sure that they are being amplified, their story is being amplified. And so when people walk away from a talk I've given or a book that I've written or, a news segment, they're thinking about those victims. They're thinking about people who have been denied justice. When we're thinking about building a platform, I think thinking about our time and attention and energy as wanting to steward that well and making sure that the message is driving the platform rather than the platform becoming the thing in and of itself. I think a lot of us, if, just speaking from someone who works within book publishing and has also published books, you're going to hear multiple times from various people, you need to have a platform in order to publish a book. But that need to build a platform can become so all-consuming that you forget why you're building it. So thinking about, I'm borrowing this from Karen Swallow Prior, thinking about the work being the platform, not the tools of social media, not the number of followers, but thinking about the work itself as driving your public presence, so that when people walk away from anything you've shared online, they're thinking about the message rather than kind of you and the persona that you are putting out there, or wow, they have so many followers versus wow, they said something really insightful that I needed to hear today. So again, just kind of prioritizing the work and the message over the platform building. And then kind of as a final point, I would just remind people here that a platform doesn't have to be a large social media following. Sometimes we get book proposals at Brazos Press where someone might have a few hundred followers on social media, but they have their credentials and credibility through their connections to various organizations, or they've received advanced degrees or training in their specialty field. They have other leaders vouching for them. So it's not just about having to build the social media platform. And I imagine that some people here hate the idea of building a social media platform and, trying to figure out reels on Instagram, like who has time for that? So just encouraging those of you who are really skittish about social media, that is not the only way to get a book deal, to build a platform. There are other ways to establish an audience and credibility when it comes to book publishing.
I want to highlight for everyone listening that we just heard something huge for some of you who have been so frustrated with having to try to learn dances to make Instagram reels. Katelyn, who herself is an editor with a big publishing company, said you don't need to be making reels on Instagram. So you're free if you hate that. Hey, you use Billy Graham as a great example, a really wholesome example of someone who had an immense platform and a lot of fame and didn't lose himself in celebrity culture. I love as you unpack for us I think it's called the Modesto Manifesto, which is where we get the Billy Graham rule from. Not everybody, but a lot of people listening will be familiar with the Billy Graham rule, how you commit yourself to not be alone with a woman in any context. So yeah, you unpack how there's so much more to that manifesto than that one rule that he's famous for. Can you unpack some of the beautiful things, the wholesome things, and the commitment he made with his friends?
Yeah. So some of this is kind of lore. We don't know exactly what happened among Billy Graham and his closest ministry partners, but the story goes that very early on in Billy Graham's public ministry, he was a young man in his 20s, and he and his ministry and his crusades were starting to get a lot of media attention. Their star was rising. People were coming to the crusades in droves, in part because I think for a lot of people, it was like, what is this spectacle? There's this thing happening and I want to be a part of it, even though I don't know exactly what it's all about. And Graham and some of his earliest ministry or closest ministry partners met together in a hotel in Modesto, California, and committed to basically curtail the temptations that they knew would come with this rising celebrity that seemed to be coming to them, or rising fame, if we want to use that framework. They weren't necessarily in it to create a flashy persona. They were all trying to share the gospel using the tools of mass media available to them, but recognize that as their fame rose, so would come some temptation. So as you mentioned, Daniel, part of the Modesto Manifesto was the Billy Graham rule. Everyone on the staff was, a young man, and they committed to never meeting alone with a woman who wasn't their wife. But also, and that's kind of where the conversation tends to stop, because people have very strong opinions about that aspect of the manifesto. But we tend to forget that in addition to that, there was a commitment to financial accountability. Graham's salary would be set by a board of advisors rather than be based on the number of attendees at crusades and how much they could fundraise at particular crusades. So instead of kind of maybe pressuring people to give in a very vulnerable moment, kind of fixing Graham's salary by a board and then being transparent about what his salary was. The men also committed to always working with the local church. They didn't want people to walk away from the crusades just thinking about Billy Graham. They wanted people to explore their Christian faith. Some of them were coming to Christian faith for the first time, but recognizing Christian faith is meant to be lived in the community of a local church. So we're going to try to help you get plugged into a local church. This crusade is not the replacement for the church. And then finally, they also agreed to, as much as they could, be honest about attendance figures, to not kind of puff up those numbers in order to get more media attention. So I think the through line in all of that, is a commitment to trying to build up institutions, specifically the local church. And then also like honesty, being honest about numbers, so that they lived and led with integrity. We are telling the truth in all things, and we want to be accountable and transparent, instead of live a kind of secrecy or insist on presenting something publicly, but then handling things in a different way privately.
I want to just take a detour for a moment, just because it is something that impacts so many of our women clients, women speakers that we work with, is the Billy Graham rule he is famous for. I know that it often just sounds really wholesome and good for a man to commit to never meet alone with a woman besides his wife. But I know that you mentioned this, and I've heard this from people we work with, that can be severely career limiting to women. Can you comment on kind of an alternative perspective, like maybe the counterpoint to the Billy Graham rule?
I can. very, very truthfully. And I have written about this as well, because the Billy Graham rule has come up in American politics over the last several years as well. So I always start by affirming the desire behind the Billy Graham rule. I think most men in ministry are not trying to leave women out of places of influence or kind of punish them for being women. I think a lot of men abide by the rule, truly wanting to lead lives of sexual integrity. Thinking about my time at Christianity Today, I mean, thankfully, none of my staff or colleagues follow the Billy Graham rule. I met with my boss, who is an older man, every week. We had lots of closed door conversations. We needed to, kind of as part of business and working together. Had he been following the Billy Graham rule, I don't know how I would have been able to lead the magazine. There are just certain kinds of conversations, brainstorming, conversations about other staff that do have to happen one-on-one behind closed doors. And there are also just some weird permutations of the Billy Graham rule that I think make women feel weirdly objectified, even though that's not the point. Like, my presence is itself too sexual, and so I have to be, we have to have a chaperone, or it actually ironically adds an element of sexual tension that I think a lot of women think this wasn't there, and I don't know what you think is going to happen over this breakfast meeting, in a public place. That's a specific example from my life. So yeah, I think when I think about the original rule, I recall that in fact, this was a time in American culture, American workplace culture, where men and women weren't working together very often. There were many hindrances to women being in the workplace. So in some ways, Graham and his confidants could easily enforce this rule because they weren't actually working with women in their ministry, as ministry partners. But I do think that the rule can be very limiting and unintentionally dehumanizing for a lot of women. And I think we're in a time when we need men and women to find ways to work together that don't feel weird.
Well, thank you for commenting on this. I have a friend who came into our church, and she sat down beside a couple she knows and his friends, and just very quietly, and just the husband, who was like, she sat down beside the husband, and the husband got up and switched with his wife. And my friend just felt, she felt so like objectified, of like, did you think that by me sitting here that I was gonna like accidentally seduce your husband? Like
I'm literally, like, your wife is literally right here.
Yeah. Or and then from a professional standpoint, just how if we follow the Billy Graham rule in a work context, it ends up accidentally making an old boys club, because those high level meetings, one-on-one, if you can only be men, only men will be in the room. So
right.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's impacted a lot of our attendees today. So thank you. You use, in addition to Billy Graham, another example of wholesomeness is your parents. I love your wordsmithing in the book. I commend this book to everyone listening. I'm not paid to say this, but it's a meaningful book, and it's beautifully written. So please, if you're one of the people today listening who doesn't win the book here, buy it. Or even if you win it, buy copies for friends. You'll enjoy reading it. So one of the 4 words that just impacted me that you crafted together, I wrote down, was regarding your parents. Let's see where this is. You said not perfection, but faithfulness. I just, those 4 words you put together like that, just kind of rested my heart as I was reading. I thought, in celebrities and people so far removed we have no proximity with, we can believe this delusion or illusion of perfection. Whereas with real people, like parents, who sometimes make us cringe, and who sometimes can get in our way of what we want to do if we're still living at home and all sorts of stuff. There's no illusion of perfection, but you can see real lived faithfulness. Can you share with us a little bit more of how the antidote to the celebrity culture that you found in your parents' faithfulness?
Well, I think the antidote to celebrity dynamics is true and deep proximity. And of all the people in the world, my parents have known me the best and the longest. And there have certainly been long seasons in our relationship where we didn't see eye to eye, where we had difficult conflict. Over the last several years, though, as I think about the shape of their life together, they've been married for over 40 years. They've lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch in Ohio for over 30 years. They've attended the same Methodist church, the one that I grew up in, for over 25 years. They are people who really stay for the long haul. They have really shown me a kind of faithfulness, to each other, to their family, to their neighborhood, to their church. They are not flashy people. They're good Midwesterners, right? Like, in the world's eyes, Tim and Karen don't seem to be leading lives of significance or success or even ministry success, right? They're not at the helm of an organization. They're not leading a church. They don't write Christian books like their daughter does. But I just wonder, for me at least, they are they're icons. They are icons of ordinary faithfulness. And I think that is maybe what our neighbors need the most to see among and from Christians, is a kind of ordinary, humble, obscure acts of love of God and neighbor done simply because that is what we are called to do. We are called to love and serve as God in Christ has loved and served us. And we can't, this side of eternity, always know the effects or the impact, or how does this matter? How does this matter in God's economy? I don't feel like these kind of small acts of faithfulness really matter all that much. Don't the people who speak from stages and write books and record podcasts, like, don't they have the more impressive and important ministry work? And I kind of want to say, no, not necessarily, right? I think we can sometimes get fixated on numbers as the sign of success and blessing. And I want to say, people like my parents, they counteract that, I think, in a really important way, as we're trying to detox from celebrity culture in the church.
Amazing. Just gonna take a pause for one quick second and give away Celebrities for Jesus to Ed Hurd in BC, beautiful British Columbia. Ed Hurd, that book will arrive at your door. And we're gonna be giving away more books throughout. You contrasted yourself with your parents in one sense of, like, they are still, I believe, in the Midwest, and they're faithfully serving here. Whereas you, their daughter, are publishing books that have sold out in Canada and around the world. I first saw you in real life at a conference where Tim Keller, Bill Hybels, a myriad of other global names were there, including yourself. It was thousands of people were in the room. This incredible, always kind of moving digital backdrop as you spoke. How do you personally, you're in New York City, which is a city I've heard is often a lonely city. And so hearing your heartbeat for proximity, for intimacy and friendship as an antidote to so much that is toxic. Can you, if you're able, take us into kind of, how do you handle the bright lights? How do you handle being on that stage where I saw you in New York at City Movement, or Movement Day, I think it was called, 2016. You speak on that huge stage in front of 1,000 people from around the world. You get off that stage. How do you steward your heart and your feelings and finding friendship amidst the bright lights of New York City?
Well, I know it's easy to say, but it's not as glamorous as you think. And I have to, do the dishes and take out the trash. And I don't even have a washer and dryer in my apartment. So I have to, like, schlep my laundry to the laundromat every week. I know it's easy to say, but you're saying, yeah, but you've spoken on stages and people read your books. So, I mean, a couple things. I'm a single woman. Most of my time is spent in professional work, but I have been very fortunate in my adult life to have friendships that have stood the test of time, that are coming up on, kind of 2 decades, friends in very different life stages, friends who are not, who don't themselves have a platform, or it's not friendship like, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. It's not transactional. It is friendship based in true care and kind of walking through different seasons of life together. So it's important to me to stay rooted in those friendships despite geographical distance, but even there, making it a priority to see each other in person at least a few times a year. So those friendships are grounding for me, as is my relationships with people in the local church. I've been in New York for 4 years, and I've been attending the same Anglican church for 2 years, and getting to know people there who don't actually really know that much about my work, like they haven't seen me speak from a stage. And when we interact in devotion group or after church on Sunday, that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about, how was your week? Did you, the weather is so terrible here. Have you gotten out of the city for the summer? Did you see this Broadway show? Like, let's go get brunch, kind of relationship that is really about sharing the Christian life together, where I am not seen as more valuable or more important, because truly most of the people at the church don't know what I do. And actually it's kind of important to me to have a space like that and other spaces where people don't, they may or may not know about my work, but that's certainly not why I'm valued in that space. And actually kind of keeping some kind of boundary there, like keeping a boundary so that there is space for relationships to be cultivated that are not transactional, that are not about professional connections, but are really about kind of pure mutual care and concern and figuring out how to walk the Christian life together.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've found in my experience in speaking and preaching that it can so easily feel like a shortcut to intimacy or for a shortcut to friendship, because you're on stage and sharing from the vulnerable place of your heart, your life examples and your passions. Often the most beautiful parts of our passions are come through in speaking. And so you get off a stage and it's easy for people to come up and be connect with you right away. But I found two things that were happening. One, if you ever are in a conversation one-on-one with someone and you get real vulnerable, usually they reciprocate. But when you're on a stage, you're vulnerable and people are now know stuff about you, but you don't know anything about them. So you can end up feeling really lonely, which is a tough place. But also there's a shortcut to like just connecting with people. And so when I joined an apologetics ministry and I was doing even more of that, my wife and I moved cities, and I just thought, I am not going to accept or pursue or anything preaching at my own local church. I'm not going to, when people say, oh, what do you do? I might say, oh, like I find a way to tone it down a little bit from sounding so glitzy. And it actually honestly was tough for me, because I was in a new city, and it was one of my first times in a while making friends the old fashioned way of like having to like show genuine interest in them and be a good person and find things to talk about rather than like people being inspired by you. So I love the way that you're embodying the old fashioned way of making friends at your Anglican church. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that the temptation to kind of shortcut intimacy is probably common for a lot of communicators and a lot of people who are maybe naturally driven by success and accomplishment and kind of wanting to secure or establish our importance in the world. There's a performative element to that I have had to wrestle with in myself, and kind of just recognizing it's fine to speak at Movement Day. I was grateful for that opportunity, but if you get off the stage and you're more isolated and lonely than when you got up, that's just a good reminder that this didn't actually, this moment, this recognition, accomplishment, praise, whatever, didn't actually give you the deep, true connection that you were longing for. That's why it's so important to kind of reinvest in life off the stage.
Absolutely. I'm going to give away another book, Ali Clausen in Calgary. You just won Celebrities for Jesus by Katelyn Beaty. Katelyn, in your book, you share some powerful insights and quotes from Henry Nouwen. One of them is, he writes, "Much Christian leadership is exercised by people who do not know how to develop healthy, intimate relationships and have opted for power and control instead." Can you expand for us on this insight from Nouwen? Like, why might Christian leadership be actually attract people who don't know how to create friendship the old-fashioned way, the only way that really is? And again, for any one of us who by God's great grace might see ourselves reflected in that quote, how can we learn to change?
Well, I think Henry Nouwen, just based on his life story and the amazing accomplishments he had as a professor of psychology and Christian spirituality at kind of elite universities. He was praised for his accomplishments relatively early in life. And he writes in the book, In the Name of Jesus, Reflections on Christian Leadership, that just at that time in his life, when he was kind of going from glory to glory in his career, he was experiencing a really profound inner emptiness and kind of what he described as almost like a spiritual death. He felt very far from God. He felt very far from other people. And so he left his academic posts and was asking God in prayer, where do I go next? What do I do? And received a visitor who knocked on his door 3 times from the L'Arche community, which is a worldwide movement for people with disabilities and people without disabilities to live together. And Henry, after you get 3 knocks on the door, you think, okay, maybe this is God answering my prayer. And so he went to live in a place where he was not known as Henry Nouwen. He was not known as the accomplished speaker and teacher and writer. He was just known as Henry. And that was a profoundly healing experience for him. And I think for a lot of leaders, again, that power differential that being put on a pedestal or a platform can create ends up feeling over time very isolating. You're kind of lonely at the top. There are expectations and pressures put upon you to be perfect, to be always kind of shiny and accomplished. And none of us can do that all the time. We need to be known in our flaws and our shortcomings and blind spots as much as in our accomplishments. And oftentimes I think people who follow us want us to be that. They want us to be a kind of icon for them. They want us to be a hero or a kind of embodiment of a particular ideal or teaching. And that's too much for any human image bearer to bear, because it's idolatry, and idolatry exacts a human cost. So I think for a lot of us, if anything I've described or anything from Henry Nouwen's story is resonating, it might mean taking time out of the spotlight, off the platform and pedestal, whether that's for 6 months or 6 years, whether it's leaving that permanently. That's ultimately a question of discernment between you and the Lord and people who know you well. But I do think kind of recalibrating our lives to just be lived off the stage can be really healthy. If you think about the language of sabbatical, and even Jesus taking time away to be away from the crowds, to be recentered in God's call upon his life, to find solitude. I think that's all just those regular rhythms are important for all of us.
Absolutely. As Enneagram 7, that what you mentioned at the end about Jesus' solitude is convicting, because that's not always my go-to place. I love being a number 7. I don't think Jesus was, or at least that ability to remove himself from being around everyone and just being alone is so healthy. Sam Black in Michigan, you just won Katelyn Beaty's book, Celebrities for Jesus. I also want to remind people to be submitting questions. I'd love to ask your questions, but here's a question from me as an interviewer. Katelyn, as you have been doing a myriad of interviews like this, I've been seeing you on a whole variety of podcasts and webinars and such like this. Have you noticed a pattern that those of us asking you questions, are we zeroing in on the same type of stuff as you go in these different interviews, or picking up on different stuff? And is there anything that you're really passionate about that you have put in the book that you feel like we're not asking you about?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's like a meta interview question. A lot of people want to talk about what celebrity is and how it's different from fame. A lot of people want to talk about Billy Graham. And, I argue in the book that he was one of the first Christian evangelical celebrities, and kind of how his life exemplified some celebrity dynamics. If I am speaking to a group of writers, a lot of them want to talk about the platform question, because I have a chapter in the book about Christian book publishing and some of the stranger practices in Christian book publishing, and the pressure that's put on prospective authors to, build the platform, and how confusing and overwhelming that can get. I think it's important, and this has come up in a number of conversations, to talk about the cost of celebrity for celebrities themselves. I talk about some of the mental health and kind of spiritual and emotional costs of, again, being lonely at the top. And then, that vision of ordinary faithfulness, I think that is resonating with a lot of people. I have been surprised that more people didn't want to talk about the connection between celebrity and abuses of power. I have a chapter on kind of recounting some of the most prominent stories of fallen Christian leaders in recent years, and everything from people who are verbally abusive to sexually manipulative to kind of financially mismanaging churches' funds. The temptations and abuses of power are there's a multitude of kinds of abuses of power, but I really wanted to draw out how celebrity shields people from accountability, and kind of the role that celebrity can often play in protecting people from accountability. And I really wrote that chapter hoping, in part, it's not a litany of Christian men behaving badly. It's really about, how do we identify these dynamics in our own churches and ministries before they snowball into something truly toxic and harmful, and a kind of dynamic that can take down an entire ministry, as we've seen in other instances. It's really about, what can we learn from these stories to use as a diagnostic tool for trying to create healthier Christian community.
Well, let's talk about that. As I was reading the book, I was thinking, I think that we can take false comfort in simply being at a small church, or being part of a ministry where we are not achieving the platform that part of our heart might want. And so we can think like, oh, the small equals healthy. But you mentioned about not only being able to find the diagnostics of an unhealthy mega church or huge organization, but what are some of those signs that we can start to recognize in our own context or in our own lives, that we're buying into the celebrity mindset, even if our context is pretty small?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you underscored that. At the end of the day, these dynamics can occur in large, medium, small. I mean, it can happen in a church of 50 people, right? Like, you're right that we can't let ourselves off the hook just because we're not part of a mega church or a large organization. I think something that can happen, at least in churches, is putting leaders in positions of power because of their skill and passion, especially communication skill, without the attendant wisdom that just comes from life. So some of this is almost being in the spotlight too young, and without enough spiritual grounding, or sometimes, spending time in a seminary where you're with peers and colleagues. You're not thrown into the limelight to kind of boost a ministry's profile, but you're wrestling with seminary teaching and education for several years before stepping into that place. So I think that can be part of it, an overvaluing of skill, communication skill and passion, without asking about maturity. Is the maturity there? It's really easy to talk about accountability. And I don't know any Christian leaders who would say that they don't value accountability. And they might point to a board of advisors or directors or an elder board, or even a group of other people in ministry saying, oh, we meet on a regular basis. I do think it's important to make sure that there is actual accountability that can happen in those spaces. Sometimes what can happen is that the people who are selected for an elder board or a board of directors are fans of the central leader, or have something themselves to benefit from their connection to the central leader. So they are disincentivized to kind of speak up about the bad behavior. maybe the central leader is like a hero to them or a mentor. And so a lot of us feel like, who am I to try to correct my hero in the faith or mentor, because obviously they have more to teach me than I do them. In situations where the leader is verbally abusive, you might just fear being lashed out at, you might fear losing your job. So I think for all of us, making sure that accountability is not just given lip service, but is a real interpersonal dynamic that works on the ground level, and that leaders welcome, kind of recognizing, I know I have blind spots. I know I have weaknesses. I am not omnipresent and omnicompetent. I need the insights and perspectives of others for our whole ministry to be healthy. So really looking for leaders who welcome that accountability.
One of the things I've learned from Sam Black, who just won a book in the last moment, was he's taught me from Covenant Eyes. He's taught a lot about how accountability is something that we can have like official accountability. So like I talk with these guys, or they get my like internet surfing history, but there's always loopholes around accountability, and that some of what helps someone be healthy, and so much of your book gets to this, is not fixating on accountability, but making time for intimacy, that being known by people, letting the shadows and fears and longings and dreams and ambitions of our hearts be known by our friends. There's so much safety in that. And that if you just have accountability without intimacy, we're going to be looking for loopholes when we do have little things that need to be caught.
Yeah, so it's easier to talk about former temptations than current ones.
Yeah.
Like I did struggle with that, and now I don't, because a lot of us, including in Christian community, kind of want to put the best face forward. It's harder to say, actually, I'm currently struggling with this now. It is a live issue. I need your help. I need you to know this about me in a real way.
Absolutely. Lorianne Thompson, who's become a dear friend, had me read Jennifer Freed's Blind to Betrayal. And I want to highlight this for anyone who might want to look it up. Jennifer Freed is a professor who invented the term, or discovered the concept of DARVO, which is really important to a lot of us who study abuse. But Blind to Betrayal is particularly looking at how the closer people are to abuse, the less likely they're able to see it. And so I've been amazed at Lorianne Thompson's grace and heart for people who have been very close to abusive people, and who aren't believing that the abuse happened. She and I met because of the abuse that my old boss, Rabbi Zacharias, had committed against her. And she has been so profoundly gracious to so many people in the ministry and in the family. And part of it is her taking the time to learn from Dr. Jennifer Freed and understand and be gracious toward those who are so close to the person, who should know better but don't. And I think that all of us in ministry or business or anything need to take to heart that reality, that if we're close to the person being accused, we're less likely to believe it. Therefore, when allegations come forward, always take it seriously. Okay, I'll get off my little. Linda Pope had a great question. Linda is from Texas, and she said, did the global lockdown of the pandemic affect celebrity culture and its effect on Christian faith communities? And I was wondering as well, did the fact that I've seen very small churches as well as big churches show up their digital presence, like they have, because they had to close down in Canada a very, very long time. You're seeing these little churches that now have this like glitzy online presence with so many camera angles of the small stage. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is actually a question I have not been asked yet. So thank you to Linda. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Daniel. Most churches that I'm aware of, we say pivoted, they pivoted to digital worship in March, April 2020. The church that I attend here immediately started live streaming their services. In New York, we couldn't meet in person. There was truly a lockdown in the city. So they were figuring out ways to offer kind of content, which I'll get into early on in the pandemic. And, I honor and appreciate the desire to continuing to offer people ministry, whether that's through preaching or prayers, during a time when we could not physically gather, thinking especially for people who are immunocompromised or just can't take the risk of being back in person. Digital worship has become really important. At the end of the day, and this probably won't surprise any of you, I do believe that in-person worship allows us to connect with one another and be together as the body, the physical body, in a way that simply cannot be replicated on screens. It's not to say that what's happening via screens is wrong or bad or needs to be done away with, but I tend to think that it's important to prioritize that in-person connection. In part, getting to the celebrity dynamic, something happens when we see someone, their face or their voice projected onto a screen or coming to us through a screen, where they become, they seem to be close in intimacy, but they are actually distant. And we are receiving them. If you're like watching on your computer or your TV, well, you're engaging them in the same way that you do many forms of entertainment. Does watching worship become just another form of kind of passive consumption or entertainment? So many other people have written about, the effect of the medium on the message. Neil Postman, and who else am I thinking of?
Marshall McLuhan, Canadian.
Marshall McLuhan.
But your Neil Postman bit was so good, because before, like, my wife and I were taking in our church service when Toronto was like New York. And so we're watching every week and just being as comfortable and casual as possible. And then I was reading Neil Postman's book, which you point out in the book, about how the way that we take the sacred and make it in a media empties it of its sacredness. And so I am from a family that just very not into, wasn't raised very high churchy, but I thought, so I felt a little bit like, felt like I'd become Roman Catholic, but we lit some candles, some scented candles, and just my wife and I tried to create, at least for a bit, more of a sacred space for us taking in church, because the way that we consume, when we're consuming church, it's already an unhealthy thing.
That's so interesting, because in you lighting candles, I mean, what I see that as is you trying to preserve the sacred nature of worship. This is a set apart time and space, even if we can't be together with our fellow church members. This is not just streaming Netflix or scrolling Twitter. This is a set apart thing that we're trying to engage in.
As we're beginning to wrap up our time, I did want to get to another quote that I love that you wrote, and this is where the book begins to land. And you wrote, if we are looking to address celebrity with a solution that can be packaged, sold, and implemented across various channels, especially one that will unwittingly make me or any other teacher a celebrity, we're back to where we started. And you end up saying, if you're looking for a program, I'm not doing that. It's about a person. And I wanted to ask if you want to share more about that person.
Yeah, well, the person is Jesus. And, I grew up in evangelicalism, and am very grateful for the ways that the evangelical church I grew up in drew me to faith in Christ. And that faith has remained over the years, thanks be to God. And I think what I keep coming back to in terms of what we have to offer the world is not so much a message or 10 steps to make your life better, or achieve financial freedom, or have a perfect marriage, or whatever, but is the person of Christ. And Christ offers a kind of he deeply knows us and deeply loves us all the same, that true intimacy that we all need to flourish in this world. And if there are strategies for sharing the name of Christ and the person of Christ that undermine that, I think we have to re-examine our strategies. We have to re-examine the tools. The tools are not neutral and can warp the gospel that we're trying to share with the world. So any kind of evangelism or sharing the gospel, I think, has to start with drawing people to the person of Christ over and against a particular kind of brand or an exciting community. All of those things can be fine, but anything that impedes or distracts from the person of Christ has to be re-examined.
As we're just in the waning moments of this call, again, I know a lot of those who are part of the Center for Public Speaking family. We have a shared heart about abuse and the church and this stuff. And being in that space, it's so easy to become cynical, bitter, jaded, hopeless. You've just written a book about something that is a widespread toxic reality of the church. Did you ever find yourself beginning to drift towards cynicism? And if so, how do you guard your heart as someone researching and writing on this to maintain a heart that isn't just angry and actually, some anger is good, but how do you not get overwhelmed by the anger and cynicism?
Right. Well, I don't know that I've completely overcome cynicism because it tends to be a hazard of the job of journalism, like a workplace hazard. I write about this in the book that when I worked at Christianity Today, we received tips about famous Christian leaders, including Ravi Zacharias and Bill Hybels, even years before the full truth of those stories would come out. And those are kind of only the most prominent examples, but our staff would get tips, or hear of allegations. And over time, it was easy to think, gosh, are most Christian leaders kind of engaging in an abuse of power? How do I know? How can I trust, when this person has presented themselves this way, but behind closed doors, they're doing so much harm and damage to other people in the name of Jesus? Well, how do I deal with that disconnect? I think it has been a reminder to me that it is fine to appreciate the work of specific leaders and figures, but there is a danger to over attaching the credibility of your own faith to their leadership, to who they are. And it's not to say we need to view all of the leaders and figures we appreciate with suspicion, but just recognizing that we are not to glorify other fallen human beings in that kind of hero worship way. We are to focus our eyes on the person of Christ and recognize that even the most talented, compelling speakers and communicators are fallen human beings in need of grace and mercy always, are able to self-deceive, are able to have others kind of misguide them in their uses and abuses of power. So at the end of the day, I would say I don't try to foster cynicism, but I do try to have a sober view of the potential and for humans and Christian leaders to self-deceive and to fall, just to not put too much trust in any one particular figure.
Growing up, my dad would always say, naivety is evil. And I would just feel like, Dad, chill, like that you're so intense. Like maybe naivety is like unhelpful. But as his words came back to me when we were processing the reality of Ravi Zacharias' abuses, that there's anybody in a position of managing HR, of leadership, a platform, we know the reality of sexual abuses throughout every community and church. 1 out of every 3 women at least are survivors of sexual abuse. So for managing people, for speaking to people, we're speaking to people who are survivors of abuse. And so much of so like 80% of abusers have proximity to the victim. So if our churches or our colleagues have experienced abuse, very likely the abusers are among us as well. And so as I was making sense of what happened, I remember my dad's words, naivety is evil. Like all of us that bear an urgent responsibility, become profoundly equipped and educated on these matters. Your book is Celebrities for Jesus, and you're highlighting some of the toxic things within the church and the world. But in so many ways, what I found as I read through it, in addition to just the beautiful way you write about Jesus, especially in that final chapter, awakened for me a fresh awe and love for who he is, in the way that you highlight the temptations he faced and the way that he was able to say no to the very things that pull in our hearts. But I also feel that your book is, in its total, so much not just about the celebrities, but really you've given us a gift to orient ourselves toward who Jesus calls the smoldering wick or bruised reed. I think that's just so beautiful, that in the world of public speaking and publishing, it's easy for us to center ourselves on those big names. But your book reorients my heart and all of us who read it to care for those who are often being overlooked and whose voices are not being heard. And I think that you're helping all of us become safer people, more wholesome. And I absolutely love it. We're going to give away a couple more copies right now to Dave Cottrell and St. Catherine's. You win a copy. Let's see, Daniel DeSoto, you win a copy of this Celebrities for Jesus. And finally, Peter Thomas, you win a copy as well. So everybody who has not won copies today of Celebrities for Jesus, do yourself and your community a favor by buying the book, reading it, and taking it to heart. Katelyn, thank you so much for your work on this book, as well as for A Woman's Place, that incredible book as well, and for your ongoing work with Brazos Press. You're using your words and you're helping others use their words to make a beautiful difference in the world. So thank you so much. I know a lot of you have already registered for our Women Speakers Masterclass that features Karen Swallow-Pryor, Mary DeMuth, Scott McKnight, Rachel Den Hollander. So many of the people who are part of that masterclass are actually the endorsements on Katelyn's book. So that's an interesting connection. But yeah, this is going to be a 12-week masterclass. It's going to happen even while my wife and I are moving across the ocean. And together, this cohort is going to be strengthening their skills in communication. Again, Rachel Den Hollander, Scott McKnight, going to be helping these women find their voice or strengthen their voice to make a more beautiful difference in this world. It's going to be incredible, and I would love for you to be part of it. And when we do plan the next webinar, once I'm landed in England, I'll let you know, because these webinars are always free, and I hope and trust that they are both refreshing and also equipping you for everyday life and making a difference in this world. Thank you again for being with me and for being part of this conversation today. And thank you again, Katelyn, so much for writing this book and for speaking to us today, but more than anything, for your own commitment to living out proximity and discipleship and a life that is healthy and wholesome.